We live on a turbulent planet. We know this because just this summer we've seen oil billowing from the Gulf of Mexico, we've seen wildfires, heat waves in Russia, and now terrible floods in Pakistan displacing millions of people. And the one thing that we're learning is that the damage from disasters like these just keeps coming, and in fact, statistically it's increasing. That's because people are continuing to expand and to develop in places that are put folks at harm's risk, and it's because we're continuing to do things that destroy what I call the natural infrastructure in the environment that helps traditionally protect people from disasters of many kinds. Things like ancient forests that block wildfires, for instance, or wetlands that dampen storm surge during times of hurricanes and things like this. We also these days are living in the shadow of climate change, and climate change loads the dice in favor of more frequent and more extreme severe events. So what do we do about this state of affairs? Well, in my book, Facing Catastrophe, I tried to take the lessons that I learned as an academic going through Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And I tried to look at Katrina and the lessons that I hope we might be able to learn from that disaster so that we can apply those same lessons in the United States and in other parts of the world for different kinds of disasters, whether man-made or what we call natural disasters. And I boiled it down to three basic things: go green, be fair, and keep safe. And what I mean by these is, for instance, by go green, I mean to take a better understanding of how to protect the kinds of natural infrastructure I was talking about that typically protect people. Right now, those ecosystem services that buffer hurricanes, for instance, or that block certain kinds of wildfires are ecological services that aren't in the marketplace and that people don't pay for. And government doesn't do enough to regulate to protect those things either. And so what I've tried to do is take some very specific recommendations and put them in the book for ways that we might think about how to better acknowledge and identify the kinds of buffers that nature provides and how to protect those, either through regulation or through a marketplace. The second objective, that of being fair, has to do with keeping a close eye on the folks who are most likely to be harmed in natural disasters. And that's the poor, minorities in various cultures that are disadvantaged historically, or the aged, the infirm, children. Almost every disaster you can think of in the United States or elsewhere in the world, there have been pockets of people who are socially vulnerable who bear the brunt. And again, we can look at the laws, for instance, in the United States and think about how we might adjust our anti-discrimination laws, our emergency response laws, our environmental laws, so that we can better attend to the needs of the people who are mostly in harm's way in these kinds of events. The last idea that I have, which is keep safe, is a shorthand way of saying that we have to know more about how we make decisions that when we are thinking about low probability, high stakes events. We call these things black swans, and disasters are a good example of a black swan event. Typically, our economic system and our legal system looks at risk by just taking the probability of something happening, multiplying it by the harm that we think that kind of event might cause. And we take that equation and we incorporate it in all kinds of ways, into insurance policies, into environmental regulations, into engineering standards. And the problem is that if that's the only equation we're using, a black swan is going to eat us for lunch. Because black swans, because they're low probability events, we tend to just diminish their occurrence to zero or something very small. And we don't have really a way of reflecting about how to prepare for something that only happens very rarely and is hard to imagine when it does. So I'm hoping that we can take those lessons of going green, being fair, and keeping safe, and integrate those into how we do business in the United States and the rest of the world. And I'm very optimistic that if we were to do take those lessons and apply them in that way, that we would make this planet a safer place in these turbulent times.